Keens is one of the most famous and historic steakhouses in all of New York City. I've been to Keens a couple of times before, and their one-of-a-kind atmosphere and incredible steaks keep me coming back. This time, I had to try their prime rib, which is massive and may be one of the best in NYC. Without a doubt, my dinner at Keens was a memorable one indeed.
Today I'm here in New York City at Madison Square Park, but I'm not here to talk about what I did today. Rather, I would like to discuss the meal I had a couple of days ago, and it was an epic meal indeed. I went to one of my all-time favorite steakhouses, which also happens to be one of the most historic and famous steakhouses in New York City. I am talking about Keens. Now, there are actually a few reasons why I decided to go to Keens the other day, and the first is I simply haven't been there in a while, and I really wanted a big piece of beef, particularly prime rib. I have seen so many photos and videos of the prime rib at Keens, and it just looked absolutely epic, so I knew I had to try it one day. Regarding one of the other reasons why I decided to go to Keens is simple. I had a gift card. However, that gift card gave me a bit of concern because when I got it out the other day in preparation for my visit to Keens, I noticed in small print that it's pretty much only good for a year. Now, I felt pretty foolish about not noticing that detail, but at the same time, I was a little annoyed because I feel like it's kind of ridiculous for a gift card to expire like that. Still, I thought that I should at least bring my gift card to the restaurant and see what they say. Plus, gift card or not, I needed their prime rib in my life. So with that being said, this was my dinner at Keens.
Keens is located in Midtown Manhattan and is fairly close to Herald Square, which is home to the iconic Macy's flagship store. It was in 1885 that Keens was established by Albert Keene. Originally, the restaurant was part of the Lambs Club, which is a theater and literary group that was founded in London. During the early days of Keens, it was frequented by actors and playwrights since Herald Square was once a theater district. These days, Keens is patronized by all, as the restaurant brings in locals and tourists alike who are after good food, steak, and a bit of history. As always, I was incredibly excited for my meal at Keens, so I showed up at 5:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening for dinner. After checking in, I was soon seated, and even that early in the evening, Keens already had a lively atmosphere. All over the restaurant, there was something to see, from the walls to even the ceiling. Keens is practically a museum. In fact, upstairs in the Lincoln Room are objects that would be the envy of any American history museum, like the playbill that Lincoln was supposedly holding when he was assassinated. Most recently, the owner of Keens spent over $500,000 for an American flag that covered Lincoln's casket so it can be displayed within the restaurant. Yeah, Keens is not like other steakhouses. Besides the array of Lincoln memorabilia, Keens is well known for their collection of pipes, which is in fact the largest collection of church-warden pipes in the world. After settling in, I began to explore the menu, which is one massive sheet of paper. Keens offers most of what you would find at a classic American steakhouse. The establishment provides a raw bar with oysters and the like. There's a decent selection of appetizers, salads, and some specials. Regarding steak, most of the typical offerings are there, but when it comes to the restaurant's most famous dish, it's anything but typical. I'm talking about Keens' legendary mutton chop, which was what I had on my last visit, but that day I was all about the prime rib. Next, I considered the beverage offerings. Keens has a fine selection of classic cocktails, but I felt like having wine for that night. There were some decent wine by the glass options, and I ended up going with a glass of the 2021 Cabernet Sauvignon from Chateau Keens. Yep, Keens has their own wine. It ended up being pretty decent. Now, it wasn't anything special, but if one wants red wine, that I feel will satisfy most palates. Plus, the wine is sold for the very reasonable price, at least for New York City, at only $13 a glass. Then, I turned my attention to the bread, which I of course had before on my last two visits. Once again, it was solid bread. It was warm and fresh with a good flavor. Although it kind of looked like someone took a bite out of my butter, but it's understandable, it was pretty decent butter. Next, I tried the small plate of vegetables paired with what I believe was a blue cheese dip. Now that was new to me. Perhaps that offering is only served at dinner. In the past, I've just been to Keens for lunch. As a whole, that collection of vegetables and dip was fine. Now, it was nothing special, but everything seemed fresh and that was a tasty dip. The plate contained celery, carrots, a pickle, and olives. While I wasn't blown away by the offering, it was nevertheless a free dish for everyone, and I appreciated it. Soon enough came the main event, and I was presented with the massive King's Cut prime rib. I knew that it was going to be a big slab of meat, but I was unprepared for just how big it was. Simply put, my photos and video don't do the dish justice. It was far larger in person, it was ginormous, it was a vegetarian's worst nightmare, and I was hyped. Alongside the prime rib was the au jus, but first I just wanted to try that cut as it was before I added anything to it. Unsurprisingly, that prime rib was excellent. I loved it. First off, the beef had such a beautiful rosy pink color. It was cooked perfectly. Texturally, the meat was very tender. My knife just seemed to glide right through it, even though it was very thick. And speaking of the meat, the prime rib, along with all the steaks at Keens, are USDA prime and are dry aged on site. The flavor of the meat was delicious, as a bit of that dry-aged funkiness came through along with a deep, beefy flavor. I also appreciated the sprinkling of finishing salt on the prime rib, which really made its flavor pop. On its own, that prime rib was excellent, but I also thoroughly enjoyed what the au jus added to the dish. It provided an extra level of savoriness and richness, but that just wasn't any old au jus, but one that seemed to have a touch of horseradish within it. The horseradish in turn lent a nice tingle and pop of spice, but it was nothing too dramatic. To put it simply, I loved the flavor of that au jus. Although I would have liked if there was some pure horseradish sauce on the side as well, but nevertheless, I really enjoyed that prime rib, which looked more and more like a crime scene the more I ate of it. Overall, Keens serves an incredible prime rib, but I do think that it's not the best in New York City. For me, the prime ribs from both the grill and Fort Charles prime rib were superior. Frankly, I thought that those two cuts had better and more complex flavors. Fort Charles prime rib, for example, uses gorgonzola to enhance their cut, which gave the meat a spectacular, rich funkiness. The grill, on the other hand, utilized a more dynamic seasoning on their meat, which was far more interesting compared to what Keens used. Plus, the grill's prime rib comes with a spectacular deviled bone, which was a triumph in its own right. To sum it up, I still really enjoyed the prime rib at Keens, and one advantage it does have compared to Fort Charles and the grill is that it's much larger and more affordable. Although, even with an $89 price tag, Keens' prime rib isn't cheap. Alongside my steak, I got a side of hash browns. In fact, that dish was the whole reason why I showed up to Keens for dinner, since the hash browns don't seem to be included on their lunch menu. Thankfully, the extra effort that went into getting a dinner reservation for that side proved to be worth it. Those hash browns were excellent. They were light, fluffy, and filled with flavor. I particularly liked adding them to my plate of prime rib, where they were able to soak up that flavorful au jus. To sum it up, that was a great side. However, the hash browns at Gallagher's are still my favorite, as those hash browns have such a pleasant textural contrast of crunchy and fluffy. Overall, I was really enjoying myself, and that prime rib proved to be not as intimidating as it looked. The cut's bone equated to a significant portion of the yield, and there was a decent amount of fat on the beef that I just didn't want to eat. As a result, I still had room for dessert. Regarding the dessert menu, Keens has a fairly wide selection. Everything sounded pretty good to me, but ultimately I decided to go with the Bananas Foster. It was a nice looking dessert indeed, featuring a scoop of vanilla ice cream in a pool filled with a sweet, rich sauce and caramelized bananas. I eagerly dove into that dish and I wasn't disappointed. It was excellent. Basically, a Bananas Foster isn't too complex. It's simple, but when done right, it's a special thing. The bananas were on the mark. They were nice and tender. Combined with that warm and perfectly balanced sauce, it was a great contrast to the cool ice cream. To sum it up, I was very satisfied with that dessert. In fact, I enjoyed it even more than I thought I would. I also feel like I can say the same thing for the desserts I've had at Keens in the past. While steaks may be the main draw of the restaurant, the desserts shouldn't be slept on. In summation, I certainly had a fine meal. After finishing, it was time for the bill, which totaled to $144.80, but with my tip, I spent almost $175. Thankfully, my gift card's expiration date wasn't an issue, and that certainly helped take some of the sting out of the bill. However, and I didn't notice this at the time, but I might have been overcharged for my side of hash browns. In the past, whenever I ordered a side, the restaurant would always give me a reduced individual portion of the dish and thus cut in half the price of the course as well. It seemed like I was served a smaller portion of the hash browns, but the price remained the same as a full side. Oh well, it unfortunately happens sometimes, but still, and most importantly, I had a great meal.
Now that was delicious. Once again, Keens delivered. For me, everything about my meal was just on the mark. Now, of course, I was primarily there for the prime rib. That was the star of the show, and it was epic. Now, I don't feel like any of my photos and video do that piece of meat justice. If it was any larger, it would need its own zip code. It was so immense. Of course, size is important, but it's the flavor that truly matters, and that prime rib had good flavor. Because of that, I would choose prime ribs like the one from Fort Charles and the Grill over the one at Keens because those prime ribs had more interesting and complex flavors. Although they did have larger price tags and they were a bit smaller than the one from Keens, so there is a trade-off. Regardless, the prime rib at Keens was delicious and I really enjoyed it. I also must say that even though it is a very large piece of beef, it's not as intimidating as it looks, and because of that, I do kind of regret not getting an appetizer, like something small, maybe the lobster bisque, which had a very reasonable $16 price tag as a daily special. However, that was no big deal because overall I was just pretty satisfied with my meal. Not to mention, that was a very good dessert. Really, every single dessert that I've had from Keens has exceeded my expectations. Plus, I'm very grateful that the gift card situation worked out. I would have felt pretty foolish if it didn't, and I bet it would have put a damper on my meal if they just rejected it. To sum it up, once again, my opinion that Keens is one of the best steakhouses in New York City is reinforced. That place is spectacular. They also serve one hell of an epic prime rib. Now, I don't think it is the best in New York City, but it is without a doubt a prime rib that's worth getting. Overall, I had a great meal at Keens. It's an excellent steakhouse, an iconic New York City restaurant, and a place that I will certainly be returning to.